All right, now let's get into three major Muscidae species. Muscidae are the ones that show up pretty early in a decomposition and they stay around for a little while, but they're not nearly as common as the Calliphoridae. However, I have done a few cases where Muscidae are our number one species. So I want you to know the ones that you're most likely to run into. So we're going to start with the most common. This is Musca domestica. This is commonly known as the housefly. Okay, and this is a non-biting filth fly, and it is synanthropic. So remember what that means from last time. This is something that occurs with humans. Now, because we have colonized every single continent, it occurs on every continent except Antarctica. And if we continue to move down there, even with more and more of the scientists and in the research stations, I fully expect that Musca domestica will be down there at some point. It is native to Africa and to the oriental region of the world, but it was introduced to America during colonial times. So as humans, as we came over to the New World, we brought this invasive species with us. So it didn't used to be in North America, brought it over from European regions as it's moved around the world. So now it is fully ensconced all over the US, all over North America. The adults are pretty easy to recognize. They are gray and black flies, about 6 to 9 millimeters long, and they've got 4 black vidi on an otherwise gray thorax. So remember, we've been looking at those vidi in the Calliphoridae and in the Sarcophagidae. In Sarcophagidae, it's 3. In Calliphoridae, it's 3. In Muscidae, it's 4. So probably the easiest way for you to just on sight know if this is Muscidae or Sarcophagidae. Look at the stripes. If there's 4 of them, it's Musca. If there's 3 of them, Sarcs. Okay. Now, the wings have a very sharp forward bend in the M1 vein. So this is another really easy way of IDing this just on sight. And it's kind of like a magic trick. So you can see a fly land, and if you look for this M1 vein right here, then you can identify this as Musca domestica. The abdomens are checkered gray, sort of gray and black, but they're not as straight up tessellated as the Sarcophagidae. And they do have this creamy yellow on the pleura, or on the sides. It's creamy yellow in coloration. The larvae have large caudal sphericals that resemble back-to-back Ds with sinuous slits. So remember that those sphericals that I showed you last time, the paratreme or the outside lining of those sphericals, they look like back-to-back Ds. So again, pretty easy to ID in, say, a maggot mass. Also, these are the ones that in a maggot mass, they look really creamy yellow as opposed to white. So easy to tell. Once you get used to seeing these on a regular basis, they really stand out in a mass of, say, Calliphoridae and Sarcophagidae. Pretty easy to tell. The immatures then can be found in a wide variety of decaying organic matter. So we see these a lot in human garbage dumps, in open privies, if that's still a thing, in livestock manure, soiled bedding, poultry litter, the wastes around fruit and vegetable processing plants, and they do oviposit on human remains. Their breeding continues year-round in tropical and subtropical regions, but it's interrupted by winter in temperate regions. So as we go further and further north, we're not going to see these species jumping out and just being out and about during the winter months. They can continue breeding if they get into outbuildings, if they get into heated barns, if they get into heated poultry houses, that sort of thing. So if you want to get rid of them, winter's a good time because you can kill off things inside a lot more easily than you can outside. Probably their most significant impact is they are a nuisance potential, and they are a potential vector of enteric pathogens. So when I say enteric pathogens, these are those bacteria that give you food poisoning, that cause you to puke and whatnot, in horrible, horrible ways. So think about where these adults are landing and feeding. These are filth flies. They're feeding on dead bodies. They're feeding on garbage. They're feeding on fecal material. But then they're also coming in and landing on your sandwich and landing on your food. This is where we get that potential mechanical vectoring of enteric pathogens. They can become quite abundant in areas where they have a lot of foodstuff. So areas where livestock or poultry and companion animals are housed in large numbers. This is actually a big issue with in the urban entomology, urban forensic entomology aspect. We're starting to get a lot of complaints as we get people moving from urban to suburban and into rural areas, places that have historically been livestock rearing areas, especially in cattle heavy regions. You get, 50,000 head of cattle in a single herd, and they're managed in this big enclosure. There's flies everywhere. You start building McMansions out there, and people who've spent $1.2 million or whatever it is on these homes, they don't want house flies. They don't want these filth flies. They're going to be there. And so we get a lot of lawsuits coming through the courts of asking these ranchers to take care of the flies, and that can be a big problem. So it's going to be interesting to see how this shakes out over the next decade or so. Now, the adults can feed on nasty things and then foul the environment with their poop. So this poop that they leave behind, we call fly specks. And it just looks like little dots all over the wall or on the windows. In poultry houses, especially, they can get on the eggs, which the chicken eggs, which cause them to need an extra step. You have to wash the eggs before you're able to sell them. Also, their fecal material can resemble high velocity blood spatter. So you can see a whole bunch of fly specks all over the wall. It looks like a shotgun blast. It looks like a gunshot left this blood spatter behind, when it's really just fecal material from the flies. So there's a lot going on with that. Now, flies can also be a problem with contaminating eggs and milk. Some of the recent recalls in these products are due to an overabundance of houseflies, and there's some hypotheses that they may be important in the spread of animal pathogens and genes for antibiotic resistance among animal production facilities. So it's a big deal to get rid of these things in these animal production facilities. Now, houseflies are also developmental hosts for nematodes that can cause problems in horses. In horses, the worms will invade the stomach lining of the horses. They lay eggs and they pass out in the feces. Fly larvae become infested by ingesting the eggs as they're feeding on the fecal material. The nematodes are going to pass through the maggot's midgut into the body cavity, develop as the maggot develops into an adult, and after the fly emerges, the nematodes migrate to the mouth parts, those sponging mouth parts. As these flies land around the mouth of a new vertebrate host like a horse, these nematodes are going to exit via those sponging mouth parts and get into the horse again. So they're big in a bunch of these different cycles. Finally, houseflies larvae have been recorded in cases of secondary wound myiasis. So the females are attracted to wounds and can feed an oviposit on those wounds. Larvae feed on the wounds and prevent healing. So these just aren't great when it comes to living organisms, and they're just super annoying, and I hate them. Things that are right up there with super annoying is the cluster fly. Polyneurudis. This occurs commonly in household infestations. It's native to Europe and North Africa, and it was introduced into North America, where it occurs throughout the continent now. The adult is 7 to 9 millimeters long. The abdomen is completely black with silvered checks and these crinkly golden hairs on the head and thorax. This makes it really, really easy to identify, just crinkly hairs. So these are actually internal parasites of earthworms, and they produce 2 to 4 generations per year. The reason I bring them up is that the adults are attracted to decomposing remains, including carrion and garbage. So we will see Polyneurudis in traps. We will see them flying around the body, but their larvae do not feed on the body. This can become an issue if you have somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about collecting adults for you. Or when you're doing a survey of flies. So I did a big multi-year survey of flies in California. I got a lot of this Polyneurudis, the adults. The larvae I never caught because they are obligate parasites of earthworms. So they can be a nuisance in households, but they really don't affect anything else other than throwing some people off. But because they're so easy to identify, you can just very easily look at them underneath the microscope and like, oh, that's Polina rudis. Move along. All right, Fannia canicularis. This is a fly species that is common throughout North America, and it is spread by commerce throughout the world. It's probably the most encountered species within the Fannia genus in North America. The adults are 5 to 8 millimeters long. They have these dark thoraxes and abdomens that are marked with various yellow coloration. Their arista lack setae. Now, the males will form these mating swarms in very shady locations, and that's super obnoxious. And their swarming behavior is what most commonly brings them into contact with living humans. But they're most noticeable where domestic and zoo animals are confined. The larvae and the pupae have these characteristic lateral and dorsal processes. So they have these sticky outy bits that are on them, and so they make it really easy to recognize just even in photos. All right, so those are the major Muscidae species. Let me know if you have any questions.